Hello, Vic.
Hello. Hello again.
Yes,
See, I've got
hello
my
again.
halo here, look. Should we say, hello, halo?
We can edit this bit out.
No, don't.
So we touched on, or we mentioned the word Cutup last week, I think.
Did.
But I think we agreed mutually that it wasn't. We didn't have enough time to get into that, and it feels like it's got, it's going to take an hour at least to sort of dig into that a bit.
I think so.
I'm not an expert at all on Burroughs, but I've dabbled, and he gets obviously he gets a mention in your book, and you mentioned the cut-up method, I think, on page 3. So it's early doors. So I thought
that's a good joke.
So I thought we could start by, I'd start by asking you when you first encountered Burroughs and the cut-up method, and what led you to actually attempt it.
Right. Well, the first thing was, it was actually Bowie's technique. Because he speaks about it, because he learnt from Burroughs. And when I first heard it, there must have been a few other times that I'd heard it being used other than Bowie, because it's a little bit like that. How many times do you need to hear an advert before it starts to impact you? So I think there were a few occasions, and I'm pretty sure I was aware that Mark Bolan was using it.
Oh.
But anyway, if you think about it, Bolan and David Bowie were friends anyway. So, yeah. But what happened was I started using it for writing songs, and I don't even know why. I know that sounds a bit silly, because I was already writing songs before. So I think, actually, if I tell you about a guy who was a really important inspiration to me as a songwriter, he was a friend of mine that I was in a band with. And this guy, Brian Early, his name was, came from Dartford, Temple Hill, same bit of ground as Keith Richards, right? Temple Hill in Dartford. And I think I might have mentioned last time that it's like there's something in the water there. Anyway, I was in the same class as his sister Janice, and Brian was a bit older than me. And Janice used to talk about Brian as being a bit unusual, eccentric. And Brian had been in a sort of punk band. In fact, there was sort of punk and this sort of new wave band type of thing, And this band were called The Jump, and they were really good. And I think one part of the band, when they sort of went their own ways, they became members of other bands, and one of them was Splodge Nessabounds, who became famous for the 3 pints of lager. Yeah, whatever it is, 2 or 3 pints of lager and a packet of crisps. But I think part of the band, something to do with the UK Subs, and a few other bands, so it's all a bit incestuous anyway, that type of thing. So anyway, Brian joined this band called Bravura, which I was in, and we were just sort of doing songs by other people and stuff, and messing around with things. And it wasn't until my girlfriend's brother, who was managing the band, said you should try doing some reggae, because that's really sort of happening in London, and you should really just do that. And we thought, really. But Brian was like really on it, so we started writing it. And Brian, because he was very dyslexic, he would just take words and then just bung them into a line without really. He'd just say, I like the sound of that. But they were magnificent lyrics. and he just had that way of just putting things together. And that really was sort of Cutup, because it was that random sort of way of putting things that you didn't know, but you just like the sound of the line. So when that band finished, then I started to use Cutup in that sort of way that people know of it, where you just take magazines, or I used a lot of colour supplements. National Geographic was a good one as well. And you just, open a page, just write down something, and I learned that it was, if you took a phrase, not a sentence, it leaves things very open-ended. So when I started doing that, I realised, and this is sort of an NLP thing, really. And I'll talk to you about this now, because I don't think I mentioned this in the book, actually. But when I started teaching this to people, trying to get people to explain how it worked, I used this little device. So I'll tell you how it goes. So if you just sort of shut your eyes and imagine a beach with the sand and the palm trees, all right? So if you just imagine that, and the surf sort of rolling in, and the feel of the wind, the breeze and the warmth and all the rest of that. So now you've got that picture. I want you to just come out of that picture a little bit, and then I'm going to suggest some things. So I'm going to say beach, surfboard, and elephant. Okay, got that? Beach, surfboard, elephant. What you seeing? What you seeing?
Oh, Ganesha, but
yeah, you would do. What's he doing?
Well, he's holding a surfboard on the beach.
Right. So you put it together, right?
Mm.
Now, if you do this with people, they'll come up with various things like a surfing elephant. He's actually holding a surfboard. So you've taken these random things and stuck them together and made sense of it. So if I do this in a room full of people, the majority of people will have a surfing elephant. There's one guy who'd been to India, I think it was, and he'd seen elephants in the sea washing. So he saw that. Somebody else saw an elephant on a plinth because he had an elephant model on a plinth on a beach. But we sort of make it logical, right? And the real killer is that the surfing elephants are cartoon elephants. You say to people, was it a real elephant? No, it's a cartoon one. So that makes sense of that, right? So I started to think, okay, so that's how it works. You take these bits, because we need patterns, we like making patterns, it just gets put together. Okay. So obviously you saw Ganesha because prior to this we were talking about Ganesha. So,
yep.
So that's the type of thing it works with. So, but like a lot of these things, there is another layer. And what happens is that when you start taking random bits of stuff together and put them together, there's like a central image or feeling. I like to think of it as an image because people can understand that more, but it's almost like a spirit of something comes in, like it's the spirit of the song, it's the sort of the thread, the narrative thread, if you like. So you can sort of go, yeah, this song is about so-and-so. It's almost like you get the plot. And once you've got that, then that gives you all the other stuff. It gives you the mood of the song, which means the type of chords that you're going to use, the sort of rhythm you're going to use, is it going to rock number, funky number, whatever, right? So on lots of layers, that works. So I then started realizing, well, when you when you take a song by somebody else and then start moving the chords around, that's cut up. And I think you've seen me do this with the songwriting stuff, where you take a melody and you turn the melody upside down or inside out, or just change and you end up with a new melody. You take a riff and you do the same thing, you end up with a new riff. So everything really is cut up. And I do it when I songwrite, that I have several songs that I'll dip into and start moving things around. So structurally, I'll do that as well. So even the structure becomes cut up. And of course, you just learn, you create things enormously fast. Oops, you sort of dipped out there, don't know what happened. Okay, so does that sort of give you a sense of how that?
Works? From, I think we've talked about it before, perhaps not on a recording, but I think we've both read that Magical Universe of William S. Burroughs book.
Yeah, that's very good, actually.
It's excellent. And I really got a sense from that this was a real obsession for Burroughs, and he was doing it with tape as well. Yeah,
well, yes, because that's the other thing. Of course, he's the godfather of sampling. Because Geisen was doing this stuff as well. I just think about Burroughs because I know about him, but you know quite a lot more about Brian Geisen, than I do, I think. But the idea is that you could record something, and what Burroughs was obviously using that type of thing for was also magic. There's a story about him cursing I think it was a restaurant or something.
Coffee shop or something, wasn't it?
Yeah, something like that. We were really rude to him. He just basically put them out of business by using Cutup.
Yeah. Do I remember correctly that story that he did things like he'd take a photograph of the street, including the coffee shop, and then he'd edit it out of the photo.
Yes.
And did he do it with tape as well, walking past and then cutting out the bit which related to
I think what he did, he also he did stuff with the tape. So I think he went back to the street and played the sound of the street, like he recorded it yesterday type of thing, and he brought it back and played the sound of the street back to itself in that today type of thing. And he was just sort of messing with whatever he thought was going on, in a strange sort of way. That sort of confusion, this sort of confusion tactic, isn't it? I don't really know how to best way to say
disruptive.
Yeah,
I suppose it's the kind of thing that would, I guess, become weaponized into, effectively psychological interrogation and torture techniques. But sort of jumping back to paper and tape, I mean, there's a real physicality to that I think it would be easy. Well, I say that, but theoretically, it's easy to write software that would effectively achieve the same ends. Obviously, it's easy to edit stuff digitally, much easier than labouring over tape and sticking it back together and it breaking and all of that stuff. And do you think that I think that physicality is really important to the doing of it, because you could, I'm sure there must be software out there that will randomize words from sources.
Of course there are. Of course there are. But of course, with tape, you physically had to cut it with a knife. So straight away you go like, there's a knife involved.
Yes.
And then you have to stick it back together again. So there's something very, it's almost like a, voodoo doll aspect.
Or alchemical.
Yeah.
Salve coagula.
Yes, yeah.
Separate and rejoin, but
yeah.
But yes, I think magic is most successful when you really get physically involved in it.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. In fact, I think it was actually Anton LaVey who was saying, because I've just been listening to that Carl Abrahamson book on Audible about Anton LaVey, and he was saying about the emotion, how you know that's part of the process. So anything that's physical, I think, is just so important. So if you just, it's like acting, isn't it? If you just say the words, you can put the robes on and all the rest of it, you know, dress up, but if you just go out and say the words, it's not really acting. It's not until you become emotionally connected with the character that something happens. And I think, you know, because obviously acting is a form of shamanism, really, if you go back far enough. It shape-shifting. So I think the physicality of doing things, like with Cutup, is, yeah, you know, you could do all this stuff, and it might work with some computer program that just can take fragments of things and stick them together. And I'm not saying it wouldn't work, but there is just something else, you know, because a lot of these things, you know, they're great songs. I've often pondered, and we'll probably come back to this at some point, but I've often pondered why certain songs become so powerful when they're actually not necessarily that good. They become good because people listen to them so often, they becomes, you know, important. And there are other songs that are incredibly brilliantly written that just disappear. You think, well, why is that? You know, what's going on? So there must be something about the involvement of people in that process of listening to a piece of music, or actively, you know, it becomes embedded in their actual life. You know, that's the song that reminds me of so and so when I was such and such an age, type of thing. But so I think that is part of it. Yeah. In answer to the question. So yeah. So the first thing the first way in was really because I'd heard of it with Bowie doing it, and then I'd started using it because I actually was writing for a new band, and then, and this is interesting because I hadn't really thought about this. I'd started writing for a new band called, Red Touch, which is actually a band that I've worked under that name for a long time now. But then I got contacted literally out of the blue by a friend of mine that had a studio, and he said, "Look, I just want you to bring I'd just done quite a big concert." He said, "Could you?" And I had it videoed. And he said, "Could you bring a video down?" And I went, "Yeah, of course." He said, "I won't tell you anymore, but just drop the video off." So I dropped the video off, and you know, a couple of days later, I get a phone call from him, and he said, "Can you come down to the house on Friday or something like that?" Yeah. He said, "Just turn up and then we'll talk about this." So I turn up, and he said, "There's a guy coming called Geoff. He's seen your video. He really likes what you're doing." I went, "Right." And he said, his father is Roger Moore, and Roger's sort of is good friends with the guy that this friend of mine was in a band with in the 60s, a guy called Deke. And Deke was a manager for a number of people, Sheena Easton, Peter Waterman, and a few other guys. But he'd offered to sort of manage Geoff. So that's why Brian had got involved, and I, you know, stumbled into this thing. So what happened then was I really started using Cutup in a big way, and I could then churn out numbers. and and they were really good, and so that sort of honed things down. And I realised, because obviously I had years of experience of writing anyway by this point, but it just became a process, because I always think of songwriting as a craft. It's like being a carpenter. You just get good at being able to make that table and chairs, and then every now and again you make one that's really good. You don't know why it's really good. It's just stands out as being better than the other ones. So yeah.
And were you, when you were using the Cutup method to write a song, so you were using that presumably for the music, as sometimes as well as the lyrics, how much sort of filtering, did some of them carry on through to, the final form with very little interference from you, or did you? Oh yeah.
Pretty much. I mean, the way I work, well, I think you know me sort of well enough to know how my mind operates. It comes in at sort of 180 degrees from everybody else often, and that's what happens when I'm writing. I'm in a sort of flow state, and it's like I got that and I got this, and suddenly this other idea pops in. It's like, oh yeah, that goes there. So the Cutup thing actually starts the thing rolling, and I'm not sort of editing it. It's almost like I can see and hear in my head what's coming, and then that becomes the next thing. Then when you get to the point where it's sort of there, then you start to edit. So it's almost finished, and then you sort of knock it into shape. And then sometimes that has to wait until you get the band in, or you've got the idea, and you give that idea to a bass player, and he puts his part on, and you think, yeah, okay, and then so on. And I've got very good at being able to do that and let people do their thing, and then I very rarely change what people do. I pretty much let people do, what if they're going to contribute, I'll let them do what that is, because I think that's part of it as well. It's like I'm sort of curating.
Yeah. Catalyzing it initially and then curating the results. I had a quick look back at the book we were talking about, the Magical Universe one, and there's a line in there. I just pulled it up. That in relation to Cutup, Burroughs says, perhaps events are pre-written and pre-recorded, and when you cut word lines, the future leaks out.
Well, that's like precognition, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, I think the guy was so ahead of his time. That's such a terrible thing to say, because it's a bit hackneyed, but I really do think that, I mean, God knows where. I mean, he's obviously a crazy cat anyway.
I mean, he was literally ahead of his time if he was cutting up and letting the future leak out into the present.
Yeah, it is. Because it seems to be, because what happens is those lyric ideas are sort of dreamlike. You do get that sort of thing where it's like you've lost control of reality, if there is any such thing as having control of reality. But reality starts to fall apart. It's the best way I can explain it. Not all the time, but sometimes it just gets very odd. And I think that's something, when you think a song is already written, it already exists. That presupposes that is the thing in the future that it's going to be, that's already coming back to the present to go, I'm here now. Here's my entry point. So I think he's absolutely right about that, because I mean, there's quite a lot of stuff now coming out about precognition, obviously based on scientific research, like quantum weirdness and all that stuff, where for an electron to know when to become a particle or whatever, it needs to know where it's going to be. And of course, there's a lot of weird stuff that happens in dreams where you dream of the future, and I think a lot of people do that. You dream of places that you've never been to, and then you end up going there. I've had that a couple of times, and sometimes it's more metaphorical, but then you see it exactly what's going on in your dreams, and it's something that you're doing that you didn't realize that you were going to be doing, and then you're doing it, and you go, those dreams are all about that, really, aren't they? I'm now doing that thing. So yeah, I think he's absolutely right.
And Burroughs presumably was using all kinds of materials, books and newspapers and so on. I mean, there's an element of selection. Like you chose, Sunday supplements, but presumably avoided all the adverts for cargo pants and.
No. Actually, the adverts for cargo pants are fantastic for the choruses. Because obviously, if you know anything about advertising, more time is spent on the headline than it is on the body copy. So if you want a line that's really going to hook people, you steal a headline, or a chapter heading, or a news flash, or it's all that type of stuff. So everything's up for grabs. Everything. And also you can do weird stuff. Like you could say, okay, well, I'm going to take every, throw a dice and then work out, I'm going to take every sixth line and just take something from every sixth line or something. You can do whatever you want. I mean, one of the things that I do is I get a lot of people when teaching this stuff. I get people to write a lot of stuff out, and then I read things back and then say, what jumps out at you? Because then you get this other subliminal thing going on that has a resonance to people. That line, I like that line. And you think, well, why do you like that line? There's something about that line that speaks to you, or you speak to it. So there are lots of little twists in there, actually, I think. And again, the other things you can do is you can write into it. So you could just do whatever you want with this stuff, but it just literally opens the door. Well, takes the doors off its hinges, really.
Yeah, it's very liberating, and it's such a great way to get away from that, the terror of the blank page.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's the opposite, really, isn't it?
It is. Those type of things of being frightened to put something down, being frightened to start, because all these things are part of that terror of the blank page. I mean, all those, with Julia Cameron's Artists, Why, where it was called, where she gets people to do their daily pages or whatever it is. That's just writing stuff. Well, again, in a way, that's another form of cut-up. It's just letting things go. It's like automatic writing. So we're back into the world of the weird again. And it's just getting yourself out of the way, isn't it? Yeah.
And this is very much what your book is all about, isn't it? It's
exactly
that.
It
a
is
collection of tried and tested techniques for doing exactly that.
Yeah. And also the fact is that these are all, you know, if you always approach these things just as experiments, and you're not really actually that bothered about the outcome, because I think that's the other important thing. If you're just sort of fascinated by the outcome, you get a better outcome. If you try to then put things into packaging, I mean, that's another skill. But you should never really do that as you're creating. You should just create. Because really, we're dealing with, you know, however you want to look at the right side of the brain or the unconscious or whatever. You know, whatever label we want to put on it. But it certainly shouldn't be analysed. It's like sort of mythos. So yeah,
that's great. Would you Cutup would you say, of all the techniques in the book, is that the preeminent one if you had to pick just one?
Well, I mean, to be frank, most things you could sort of say are Cutup. Even like sort of lateral thinking techniques like Edward de Bono's stuff, you know. That sort of starts looking like bibliomancy, which again, you sort of go, well, that's sort of Cutup really, because it's like opening a book up and just popping your finger in there and reading what's on the page, you know. Okay, what Burroughs was doing was actually physically cutting things up, but that, you don't have to do that. I mean, that's metaphorically cutting things up. You know, you're taking things out of context. But a lot of Edward de Bono's ideas of, you know, opening a book and just taking or a dictionary and just taking a word out and then brainstorming the word. I mean, you can still look at that and think, well, similar thing. It's just stopping you thinking in that sort of vertical thinking sort of way, you know, instead of it being like, well, we'll start over here instead. So yeah, so in answer to that, it's a bit like, well, you know, the other techniques, yeah, you can sort of look at them and go, well, it's almost the same thing really if you broaden it out. But yeah, interesting.
I wonder if we should move on perhaps to another aspect. We haven't talked yet about the organisation of the book.
What organisation? Oh yeah, okay. What do you mean about the structure of using?
Yeah, the alignment or resonance with Sgt Pepper.
Yeah. I thought so. Yeah, because obviously Sgt Pepper is sort of overtly referencing Burroughs anyway, because the montage on the cover, and Burroughs is in the picture, along with Crowley and a load of other, you know, Indian mystics and goodness knows what, and some film stars and Muhammad Ali and all the rest of it. And I thought, well, that's a perfect representation of the technique, and the songs are like it as well. You know, you've got songs that are obviously built in that sort of random way, and then you've got some other songs that have got, you know, it's Western pop music, but there's some sort of Indian thing going on in there as well. So I thought, well, that would be interesting to reference the book using the song titles as chapter headings. Not because the little essays that go under those chapter headings are actually, well, they're not consciously or deliberately put there, but sometimes they make sense of that, which is again the whole point of, like, there might be a meaning there, but I don't even know what it is. And it's always difficult when you're writing something that is about creativity, that for it to be creative, it needs to be not too organised, if you see what I mean. And I think that's one of the problems when you read books about how to write songs, or how to write a novel or something like that. They're often terribly boring because they're not, by their very structure, they're not doing the creative thing.
Yeah, I mean, the very idea of following a formula.
Yeah,
it's the antithesis of creativity, isn't it?
Well, it absolutely is. I've got a book. I think it's by Jim Webb, actually. I mean, he's like a really very, 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 very famous songwriter. I don't think I've read more than about the first 10 pages of it. It's probably really good, but it's like, I'm sure he doesn't write like that. I'm sure he doesn't write his songs like that. But of course, once you then have to write for a publisher or whatever, and they're going to tell you how the book's going to be, suddenly you can't do your thing, can you? So that's why I've used the Beatles. But I could have used other people. But I just thought, often with the Beatles are a really important. This is a stupid thing to say. They're really important. They are the most important band for songwriting. Period. Even if you don't like them, it's just that they were the first band to write their own songs, because everything before them was written by songwriters.
Mm.
So for a bunch of guys to get together and write songs, okay, George Martin was on hand, right? And I think that his influence can't be understated, because the guy was brilliant. He's a genius. So sometimes you need that. Certainly somebody like Lennon would have been able to have really sort of bounced off George Martin's stuff, his knowledge. So I think that's an important aspect. But to be able to churn out those numbers as quickly as they did, and really never put a foot wrong, because they're just incredible. And I think when you write songs, you realise how good they are. How good the Beatles are. Now, they're not the only ones who are really good, because I could say, well, ABBA, Bob Marley. But I think the Beatles are really important, because there's never going to be a situation like that again, where somebody can just burst on the scene like that. Not in music, I don't think, because that's done now. It would have to be some other art form that we probably don't even know yet.
They were certainly, well, in fact, Sgt Pepper was their first real studio experiment, wasn't it? I think, or at least, they'd stopped touring, hadn't they? And then Sgt Pepper was very much an album project.
Yes, yeah,
and it itself involves a lot of tape cut up and experimentation, doesn't it?
Yeah, and playing around with the equipment, because the actual equipment becomes part of the cut up as well.
Yeah,
and the equipment becomes part of the instrumentation, which again, everything's like completely being turned around. The tape machine becomes an instrument other than just being a way of recording the sound. So I think it's utterly profound what they were doing.
And they were the right band at the right time to adopt those techniques. And really pioneered them. I mean, they had the budget, but they were also extremely talented. So you know, they were the right ones to be doing that pioneering work.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, multi-tracking was already in existence, but it wasn't really being used properly. It wasn't really until the Beatles started doing that stuff on Sgt Pepper that people then really got, you know, you went from a 4-track machine being locked together, so you had a couple of 4-track machines, you suddenly got 7 or 8 tracks, and then bouncing tracks across and all that type of thing. But Les Paul had invented the Les Paul guitar. He'd already invented a multi-track machine well before the Beatles, but nobody could really see the point. But they did then. So suddenly, you're on 16 track, 8 track, 16 track, 32 track. But again, that changes the nature of the music. Because obviously, if you recorded like Elvis did in the early days, a bunch of guys in a room, that was it. And it's a different experience when you listen to that music. It's instantly there. Whereas, of course, when you listen to sort of multi-track stuff now, because it's not even multi-tracked, is it really? Most music sounds completely dead in the water. It's very tidy, but there's no soul in it. Occasionally you get something and it just has got soul in it, and it could be completely electronic. It's not really about whether it's electronic or not, or computerized. It's just something in it. And again, that keeps bringing me back to this idea about how can we make sense of that? And of course, to me, it keeps coming back to this sort of thing about, magical thinking, something being possessed, something inside, inspirited into something. And lots of musicians think like that. It's just they tend not to talk about it, I don't think. But just in the same way as somebody might inspirit a statue, I think it's the same with a piece of music.
And also, and musical instruments.
I think it was Lon Milo DeCamp was talking about one of his most important musical, magical instruments was a guitar. And you sort of think, now that makes sense. That idea of, well, it doesn't have to be a dagger or whatever. So it's like, because that's the trouble. Every time things get codified, we get stuck, which again brings us back to the thing of Cutup. It's like, it's an old newspaper, but this newspaper can affect the future, possibly affect the past. The thing that you had your chips in, well, not anymore, but you know what I mean. Something that you would have thought, well, it's not of any use. It's like, well, suddenly this is a magical implement. So I think it's very important for us to be able to think like that. Just reimagine how we do things. So So that's the Beatles.
Yeah. Just going back, you're talking about inspiriting. Is that something you've done, or could you, for example, treat your guitar, suddenly decide you're going to, try and inspirit it, and then,
I think
give it
that
offerings?
Anyway. I think that happens anyway.
Yeah.
As soon as you play an instrument, because how can you explain a Stradivarius? Because there was a science program talking about instruments like this, and they had, I think her name's Tasman Little, violinist, and she, obviously none of these violinists own a Strad. They borrow them. Obviously somebody who's got a lot of money lend them out. And she said that if she goes away on holiday and has a break, when she comes back after being away for 2 weeks, the Stradivarius seems to be sulking. And they actually said, well, you know, these scientists sort of went, well, let's have a look at this and let's listen to the sound. So they experimented with this, and what they discovered was that the resonance of the instrument changes. Now, it could say, okay, you know, there's a physical reason for something. Yeah, no, but that is weird. And, you know, an explanation of that about, well, it really is something that lives inside that instrument. It's a more poetic way of being able to understand how you engage with that than just thinking, well, I need to come back and play a load of scales so the tone comes back. I mean, that's pretty rubbish, really, particularly when that has been made by a skilled craftsman, God knows, only 300 and odd years ago. I mean, it's extraordinary that it still even exists. So I think when it comes to musical instruments, definitely it's about how much you play them, how much time you spend with them, and then they pick up a life force.
That's a much better way of encouraging someone to practice than just saying you need to practice.
Yes,
you need to build a relationship with your instrument.
Yeah. You need to find out what demon is living in there. I'm sure that there are other very strange experiences with instruments that have belonged to some other people. I'm sure that there must be. I've just never looked into that, but I'm pretty sure there might be some strange stuff that happens with that. But yeah, so inspiriting things. I mean, other objects, yeah. You know, I've done stuff with that. But again, a lot of this stuff is about, I don't want to use the word intention, but it is a sort of intention, because it's not just that, I don't think. You know, I think it's part of the process, but I don't think that's everything. And I don't know what it is that arrives when it arrives. So I don't know. And to be honest, I'm not that bothered. It's just a case of, did it arrive? So.
And when that happens, is it a struggle in the future if you're playing that song again live? You've got to really reconnect with that.
That's an interesting point, actually. Yeah, because it's on a lot of levels. Because first of all, you got to remember a song if you haven't played it for a long time. And I did have this happen, actually, where we had a reunion gig for a band that we hadn't been together for 20 years. And we went and played a venue that we used to play regularly. And people came from all over the place, somebody from Australia, somebody from California. And it was funny because we didn't have a complete rehearsal. We had, you know, the rhythm section in one thing, and I did a rehearsal with this vocalist and stuff, like the backing vocalist and stuff. And then the first time we actually played together was in the gig. But what was fascinating is how quickly those songs came back. And weirdly, there were certain bits I thought, oh God, I can't remember that bit in the middle. And because a lot of the songs had some weird chord structure in the middle, because I could. And I couldn't remember what it was. And I thought, oh God, I have to sit down and work that out. But the bass player and the other rhythm guitarist knew the bits I didn't know, which was embarrassing because I wrote the song. So, but it don't take long. And then and then suddenly, because it was again, this is like an alchemy thing, because there was a collective thing. When it was all happening and everybody was involved, that was very strange, because it was like, my God, this is so incredible, And people kept turning around and saying, these songs were fantastic. God, we were good. It was like, it's a shame we didn't realise then, how good we were. Very strange. But it took 20 years to sort of learn that, which is fascinating, I think. So I think if only I can get people to have that sort of idea of be fascinated by all of that with this, then I think I've probably done my job, really. If people are starting out thinking, yeah, let's just write songs and weird stuff can happen, and if I do that, something will be, something will happen, and I'll get some stuff, and and the opportunities will come, and they are, even if we don't think the songs are good, they're better than we think they are. If people, there's all of that. So keep getting yourself out of the way. Don't analyze what you think something's good or whatever, because often songs are much better than you think they are. And allow those songs to live as a thing. So once you've released them in the world, it's their job to do something as well. It's their job to get out there and become known. Like sending out little tulpas or whatever you want to call them.
Egregores or
servitors or whatever you want to call them. Because they're sort of like that, really.
Yeah. So you need to recall that spirit, bring it back into the room.
Yeah.
It's the thing that gels the band together in that performance.
Yeah, and obviously there have been a lot of bands who knew that anyway, and they knew that's the sort of thing they were doing. Okay, they'd have different ways of doing it. Whether it's a Grateful Dead or whether it's Bowie or whatever, all these people knew that they were doing things, or it's somebody like Genesis, not Genesis the band, but Genesis P Orange.
Yeah.
And Psychic Youth and all that stuff. They knew they were doing something, and probably all those people thought in a different way about what it was that they were doing. And it doesn't matter, because I think it's probably one of these things that's unknowable, that creative process. It's just that we can do it, but we don't really know it. Yeah.
I was listening to an interview with Jazz Coleman from Killing Joke, having just seen them for the umpteenth time. I'm fascinated by them, being a fan for a long time. There's a great documentary on them, the Death and Resurrection Show, which is well worth watching. It goes through the whole, I mean, even the creation of the band as a magical act and all of that. It's just so fascinating. But it was interesting to hear about him talking about their creative process. They don't write stuff and then come together to write a new album. The writing of the album begins when they get together. There's no advanced preparation. It's more about choose a location and we'll be there. What happens.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. When you understand how the creative things work, you can do that, and it doesn't take long. Because if the songs already exist, and the songs know that you're going to be at a certain place, then they're going to turn up and all.
Yeah.
I think that's the thing.
This leads me on to another question. So you're teaching guitar playing, you're teaching musicians on a one-to-one basis, and you're teaching songwriting. Do you do sort of mentoring of bands? Do you teach any?
I used to do a lot of that.
Yeah,
I used to do a lot of that. And obviously Blues Camp is really that type of idea, where you get a group of people together and put them into bands and then teach them all the tricks, really. That's something I really like doing. And you can really transform a band within half an hour. Okay, they need to work at it, but once they see what they could do, it's very rewarding.
And what kind of things would you do in that situation, in that half an hour?
Well, the classic thing is to get them to play something and you film it, because then you can see what they look like and they can see what they look like. And then you get them to do the song again, but you tell them a few things that they've got to do. And you also say to them that you'll feel a bit stupid doing this, but just bear with me and just do that. And then you film it again. And then you say to them, you know, how did that feel? And most times they go like, oh, it felt stupid. You go, right, okay, now have a look at this. So you show them what they look like when they first started. And then you show them the second video and it's like, oh shit, yeah, that looks much better. And that's it. Once they realise, and you say to them, but the only reason it felt weird was because you were breaking a habit. It just felt unfamiliar. Once you get over that and think, well, that's all right. It's okay to feel odd or stupid, but it doesn't look stupid. It looks really good. And then that's it. They're off.
That's great.
Yeah.
Is it sort of effectively finding ways to encourage them to leave leave themselves behind in a way and become effectively an actor acting themselves?
Yeah, it is really. It is. And just giving them an idea about this sort of magical space that they're in, which is called a stage. You know, that you can step forward and it looks a lot. You can step backwards with one foot and it's a dramatic movement. You know, if you turn slightly with one foot, you've changed the direction where you're looking. And how a vocalist can just sort of turn to one side of the stage, turn to another one, and he's engaged the entire audience. So a lot of these things are formulaic, really, and they're the sort of things that any actor would do. And what's great is you just have to watch somebody who's a good performer and go, all right, got it. You know, and then you just emulate those people. So we're back to the sort of NLP modeling, really. Then just copy people, and just see what that looks like. Once you get the idea that it looks good, then you carry on doing that. If you just do those things, it seems a bit weird. Then you don't do it anymore. You see,
it's an oft-repeated anecdote about Bowie, but I love that idea of him walking into a room and instantly assessing where he would look best. You know, in terms of his, the lighting and positioning. Such a skill.
It is a skill.
And again, I suppose that's taking you out of yourself. It's pulling yourself away and giving yourself an extra layer of skin in a way to protect that, your vulnerability.
Yeah, because obviously a lot of these characters that are actually quite shy. I mean, Prince was a classic example. I mean, he's a terribly shy guy. And I think Bowie, was a lot of this is just that they were putting on a persona to deal with the fact that they weren't confident, and so they became something in order to deal with that. And of course, then that becomes what makes them so famous as performers. So yeah, interesting, I think.
It's interesting the effect that has, like you say, the gestures need be only small, but they have a profound effect on the viewer.
Yeah.
And it creates that thing where, you see the performer on the stage and it's hard to relate them to the performer off the stage sometimes if you see them without, in the street or wherever.
Exactly.
I had the same thing at the weekend. Down in Cardiff at the Six Music Festival. There was a band opening up on one of the nights, band from Wales called the Bug Club, and I looked at them online and I thought, it's nice. It's gentle music. On stage, they were an absolute riot. There was only 3 of them, and they made such a noise, and there was so much energy. And I was just blown away by them. And later on, a couple of bands later, 2 of the members of the band walked past us at the bar, and I realised in time it was them. Stopped them just to say thanks. That was amazing. And I was amazed at how small they were.
Yeah.
I mean, they weren't really small, but I mean, on the stage they looked like giants.
Mm.
And in reality, they were about 5 foot. And it's hard to reconcile the stage persona when someone's doing it right and really lost in the music, but employing some of those techniques to the person behind that.
Absolutely. It's absolutely. So it's a complete illusion. The whole thing is. So even all the songwriting, all these sort of musical skills that people have. I mean, it's sort of an illusion, really. The whole thing. Even when you see people that are great players, there's a lot of trickery. I mean, a lot of things. This is really true with guitar. A lot of the difficult sounding things that you hear are actually quite easy to play. I mean, they're not as hard as they sound. And then conversely, the other way, that some very simple things are actually quite difficult to play. So, all of this stuff is not quite as it seems.
Good stuff,
Cool.
Vic.
Right. Well, I think we've done it.
Really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fascinating. I enjoy it. It's good to do. To sort of create things and get other people creating things as well, which is lovely.
I suppose final question then, for this session anyway. You've been doing this for a long time. Do you get people coming back, years later, you've kind of forgotten about them, and
Oh my God,
they
yes.
get in touch and say,
yes, I do.
it was an anecdote.
Oh, there's quite a few. I get people. I mean, it started happening quite a bit because obviously I was teaching a lot of people at one time. Because I've taken it a little bit easier now. But I used to be. It was literally all the time, and it'd be groups of people and all sorts of stuff. And I remember going to one of the parents' evenings for one of my daughters, and so this is obviously going back a little bit, but this teacher stopped me, and she said, "Oh, you're Vic, aren't you?" Because my daughter, daughters get very embarrassed, don't they, when their fathers get stopped. I said, "Yeah." She said, "You won't know me, but my son is, whatever his name was," and it was like, "Oh, right, yeah." She said, "He's in Hong Kong, and he's still playing. He's playing in a band in Hong Kong, and it's the most amazing thing that he's done. That is the thing that really has held him." And it was like, and my daughter was sitting there like, "This is really embarrassing, Dad, But it's those sort of things, and they're the ones that I find the most interesting. It's not necessarily somebody's been on tour around America or whatever, and that's lovely and all that. But it's when you get people that have been playing, or you meet them again. There's lots of people on the podcast that I interview, and I taught them at some point. Sometimes I don't remember, but it's been that sort of thing that changed the way they thought about stuff. To me, that's really important. It meant that they could do that, because I've always said that, if I can do this, you can do it. There's nothing special. It's just hard work at times. You have to be persistent. But I think it's that people realizing that there's something that they can do. I think it's really, really amazing. So yeah, I've got people that are playing, and I had one person tell me playing the guitar stopped him having another mental, a nervous breakdown. And that's all of that stuff to me is like really incredible. And somebody's, said that their health has improved because they play the guitar or they play the bass or they write songs or whatever. So yeah, that's the power of this stuff, really, I think.
Excellent, Vic. Well, thank you very much, sir.
Well, thank you. Thank you for your time. It's really good.
Pleasure.
It's nice to
Absolute
chat.
pleasure.
Good one.
Well,
Right.
shall we do it again?
Yes.
Yeah,
Just
excellent.
let me know.
All right.
Okay.
All right, nice one, Vic. Thanks very much.